Bright lights filled the CNN studio as Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders adjusted her coat. Every movement echoing her self-assurance. She walked in confident, thinking she'd be facing an easy opponent. Sitting across from her was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a 43-year-old Democrat from Texas known for her bold speeches and fearless activism. Sanders had spent the morning preparing what she thought would be the perfect verbal strike, ready to reveal what she considered just another loud progressive lacking real depth. But the next 20 minutes would upend everything she thought she understood about political combat. Crockett had been quietly getting ready with her own strong points, and when she responded, it wasn't just a reply, it was a full takedown. Sanders was left speechless, and the political world couldn't stop talking. This wasn't an ordinary cable news debate. It was the moment a veteran political figure realized the new wave of Democratic leaders shouldn't be taken lightly. Before we jump into this epic political face-off, hit the like button if you're excited to see how Jasmine Crockett flipped the script on Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss these powerful political showdowns that are shaping American politics. Now, let's look at what happened inside the CNN studio. There was a buzz as Anderson Cooper got ready to moderate what many thought would be a simple discussion about education. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, governor of Arkansas and past White House press secretary, had specifically asked for this debate. She wanted to take on Jasmine Crockett, thinking it would be a good chance to score political points against someone she assumed was a lucky newcomer from a safe Democratic district. Sanders had been doing well in polls and had some big legislative wins in her home state. Her team had given her a detailed briefing on Crockett's history, but they had made a major mistake. They only looked at surface-level points and completely missed Crockett's sharp legal mind and political talent. Jasmine Crockett calmly sat in her seat, looking over her notes one last time. She had once been a civil rights attorney, and being underestimated was nothing new for her. Born in St. Louis and later graduating from the University of Houston Law Center, she spent years winning tough cases that others thought were impossible. Her legal background had taught her one thing: never walk into a fight without a clear plan to win. When CNN invited her to debate Sanders, her team wasn't sure at first. Sanders had a big name, years of national political experience, and a talent for delivering biting remarks. But Crockett noticed something others didn't. Sanders had grown too sure of herself as a political attacker. She often looked down on her rivals, especially women of color, and Crockett was determined to make her regret that. This debate wasn't just two politicians going back and forth on TV. It was a symbolic fight between two visions of America's political future. Sanders stood for the older Republican establishment linked to Trump, known for aggressive tactics and cultural fights. Her time as Trump's press secretary helped her win the governor's seat, and she was now seen as a possible future presidential candidate. Meanwhile, Crockett was part of a newer, younger group of Democratic leaders, diverse, bold, and focused on major reforms. She didn't fear shaking up the old ways of doing politics. This showdown was more than just about education. It was about which direction American politics would go, and education was the ideal topic to stage this battle. Sanders had passed a series of controversial education laws in Arkansas, including ones that limited diversity efforts and restricted how race and history were taught in schools. Crockett, on the other hand, had been one of the strongest voices in Congress pushing back on these policies, calling them disguised efforts to undo decades of civil rights work. Both women came ready, knowing education was a key issue for families across the U.S., and whoever spoke more clearly could win political points for their party in the next elections. As the cameras turned on and Anderson Cooper started his opening, Sanders looked fully confident. She had handled reporters at the White House for years and was no stranger to political conflict. Her plan was simple: go on the offensive. She aimed to label Crockett's ideas as out of step with everyday Americans, to paint her as another elite progressive too focused on political correctness, and to present herself as a mother and governor with real experience on education. But Sanders had no idea she was about to step into a trap Crockett had been building for weeks. The red recording light came on, and millions tuned in. The studio was thick with tension. Both women straightened up, ready for a verbal battle. Cooper's first question seemed basic, asking each of them to explain their vision for education in America. But Sanders saw it as her cue to hit hard, and early. She opened with what she clearly thought would be a major blow. With a confident tone shaped by years of high-stakes press briefings, She stared straight at Crockett and launched into her attack. Anderson, what we're seeing from Congresswoman Crockett and her progressive friends is completely disconnected from what real American parents want for their kids. Sanders started, her voice full of arrogance. While hardworking families in states like Arkansas are focused on making sure their children can read and do math, people like Ms. Crockett are more focused on pushing woke ideas in classrooms. Her party believes parents shouldn't be involved in their children's education. They think teaching kids to hate their country is more important than giving them the skills they need to do well in life. Her opening was designed to hit hard, attacking Crockett's connection with working class people, labeling her as out of touch, and using hot-button cultural issues that have helped Republicans win in the past. Sanders didn't stop there. She waved her hand in a dismissive motion toward Crockett as she kept going. I've actually run a state. I've put real education policies into action. I've talked to parents who are tired of their values being ignored by disconnected lawmakers in Washington. What has Congresswoman Crockett really done, aside from giving speeches that sound good on MSNBC? What has she done to actually help students succeed in school? The crowd in the studio, an intentionally chosen blend of education supporters and political analysts, shifted uncomfortably as Sanders amped up her tone. She was clearly trying to assert control early on, leaning on her background to portray Crockett as inexperienced and unfit to be on equal footing with the sitting governor. Cooper tried to cut in and let Crockett speak, but Sanders wasn't done. She had spent weeks crafting this exact opener and was intent on hitting every mark. The reality is, Anderson, people like Representative Crockett are exactly what's wrong with today's Democratic Party. Sanders pushed on, her tone growing sharper. They prioritize theatrics over real leadership. They prefer tweeting problems instead of solving them. And in terms of education, they're ready to trade away our kids' futures in the name of political correctness. She paused briefly, confident that her opening statement would leave Crockett shaken. Governor Sanders leaned back, smiling, as if she had landed a knockout that would set the mood for the full debate. But when the camera moved to Jasmine Crockett, what it revealed surprised many. Crockett didn't look shaken or defensive. She looked steady, focused, like a lawyer who had just witnessed her opponent make a big blunder. She jotted down a few notes, then glanced up at Sanders with the faintest smile, hinting she had something unexpected ready to reveal. Finally, Cooper managed to steer the conversation toward Crockett. Congresswoman Crockett, Governor Sanders has voiced some strong concerns about your stance on education. How would you respond to her comments? It was the opening Crockett had been waiting for, but instead of rushing to answer, she let the governor's words linger. The silence was deliberate, giving the audience time to reflect on the dismissive tone Sanders had used, while also building suspense for her response. And what happened next caught Sanders completely by surprise. Crockett didn't defend herself. She went on the attack, with calm precision that showed both her legal background and political sense. Thank you, Anderson. I actually appreciate Governor Sanders for giving such a vivid example of the exact kind of language that blocks real improvements in education. Crockett began, her voice even and firm. But before I get into policy, I think your viewers deserve the full picture, something the governor didn't give in her remarks. Turning toward Sanders, Crockett subtly shifted the energy in the room. Governor Sanders talks about running a state and setting education policy. So let's look at the results. Under her leadership, Arkansas ranks 48th in education nationwide. It also has the second highest child poverty rate in the country. And this year alone, Arkansas has lost over 200 teachers due to poor funding and lack of support. These aren't opinions, they're facts anyone can verify. Crockett's reply wasn't just a defense, it was a calculated counterstrike. She hadn't just blocked Sanders's opening, she had flipped it to her advantage, and she was only beginning. Now, since the governor seems interested in my work, let's talk about it, Crockett went on, her tone growing stronger with each line. I've been a civil rights attorney for years, working for educational fairness across Texas. I've won court cases that opened up AP programs to underserved students. I've fought and overturned biased funding systems that denied fair resources to schools with large minority populations. And yes, Governor, I've read the bills you signed in Arkansas, and I know exactly how they'll hurt the very children you claim to defend. The room fell silent as Crockett pulled out a thick file from her folder. This here is House Bill 1228, which Governor Sanders signed just last month, she said, raising the stack. Section 3 of this bill bans teachers from discussing how historical events still affect different communities today. Governor Sanders, can you tell the parents watching how stopping teachers from connecting past and present will help their kids think critically? Sanders's face turned visibly red as she realized Crockett had done something she hadn't anticipated. Read and dissected the law in detail. This wasn't the surface-level talking points Sanders had prepped for. This was deep policy analysis, and Crockett was in control. Crockett didn't pause. This same bill lets parents challenge any classroom material they label as divisive, without ever defining what that even means. Governor Sanders, you're an attorney too. You know, unclear language in law leads to confusion and legal messes. So tell us, did you sign this bill knowing how vague it is? Or did you sign it without understanding what it means? The question hung in the air. Sanders visibly struggled to answer. Crockett had taken the debate away from political shots and into real policy where facts and knowledge mattered more than rehearsed lines. Cooper tried to let Sanders respond, but the governor's confidence had clearly taken a hit. That's not what the bill says, Sanders muttered, her voice lacking strength. Congresswoman Crockett is twisting a law that's meant to protect parents and stop schools from pushing inappropriate material. It was precisely the wrong move, and Crockett immediately seized the moment. Governor Sanders, I literally just read from Section 3 of your own bill, she said, lifting the document once more. These are your words, signed into your law. If I'm misrepresenting them, please explain what they actually mean. Even better, explain how you intend to train teachers to apply these vague rules without creating a chilling effect that stifles real discussions about history or current events. This single exchange flipped the power dynamic Sanders thought she had established. Instead of appearing as the seasoned governor educating a less experienced congresswoman, Sanders now looked like an ill-prepared student being quizzed by a professor who had clearly done her homework. The shift was obvious to the audience, and Sanders's body language showed her rising discomfort as she realized her strategy was backfiring. But Crockett wasn't done. She had invested weeks preparing for this showdown and was about to deliver the final blow that would destroy Sanders's confidence. There's one more thing I want to talk about, Governor Sanders, Crockett said, her voice signaling that something big was coming. You accused me of giving speeches that sound good on MSNBC, but don't actually help kids learn. Let's talk about that, because I believe it reveals a lot about how you view our work in Congress. Sanders straightened up, sensing something was coming, but unaware of the revelation ahead. Crockett reached into her folder again and pulled out another document, this one bearing the Arkansas Department of Education seal. This is a federal grant application Arkansas submitted in March this year, Crockett said, raising the pages. It's a request for $12 million in federal education funding, specifically aimed at improving literacy in high-poverty schools. Governor Sanders, do you know which federal program this grant was submitted under? Sanders's face turned pale as she realized what was coming, but Crockett didn't pause. This grant was submitted under the Educational Equity Enhancement Act, a federal bill that I co-authored and that passed the House with bipartisan support. So when you say I only give speeches and do nothing, you're actually attacking the author of the legislation your own state is trying to benefit from. The $12 million Arkansas asked for would go directly to the kinds of literacy programs you claim to support. The revelation was crushing. Sanders had built her opening attack on the claim that Crockett was all talk, but now it was clear her own administration was pursuing funds from Crockett's work. The irony was impossible to ignore, and the effect on Sanders was immediate and visible. But here's what makes this even more important, Crockett continued, clearly enjoying the moment. Your grant application specifically mentions the need to address historical inequalities in education funding that have disproportionately hurt minority communities. Governor Sanders, how do you justify applying for funds to address historical inequities while at the same time signing state laws that ban teachers from discussing the long-term effects of historical events? The question struck directly at the heart of the contradiction in Sanders's position. Her reaction showed how unready she was for this level of challenge. That's not the same thing, Sanders mumbled weakly, but couldn't explain what made them different. The contrast between the two women was now undeniable. Sanders had come ready to throw out quick attack lines, but Crockett came with detailed law references, documents, and a clear game plan to expose her opponent's weaknesses. Cooper, understanding the weight of what had just happened, tried to offer Sanders a chance to recover. Governor Sanders, how do you respond to Congresswoman Crockett's point about the contradiction between your state's grant application and your legislation? But Sanders was clearly struggling. Her usual control was gone, shaken by the sharpness of Crockett's argument. "Look, federal funding and state education policies are two different things," Sanders said. "We can accept federal money while still holding to our values around parental rights and education standards." But her tone lacked the strength it had at the beginning of the debate. It was a weak response that didn't actually address the contradiction Crockett had raised. Everyone in the room could feel it. Sanders had lost control of the conversation. Crockett, sensing she had Sanders cornered, decided to push harder. "Governor Sanders, I'd like to clarify something," she said with a touch of sarcasm. "Earlier you said politicians like me think parents shouldn't be involved in their children's education. Can you point to any specific statement or bill I've supported that would stop parents from being involved?" It was a trap, and Sanders fell right into it. "Well, you support the Democratic agenda that puts unions over parents," she said, falling back on vague party lines. It was exactly the kind of baseless, general answer Crockett had expected. "That's not a real answer, Governor Sanders," Crockett replied sharply. "I asked for something specific, and you gave me a campaign slogan. Let me be clearer. I've co-sponsored laws to boost funding for parent involvement programs. I've backed bills that require schools to give regular progress reports to families. I've pushed for wider access to after-school programs that help working parents support their children's learning. Which one of these do you think stops parents from being part of their kids' education?" Sanders had no reply because there wasn't one. Crockett had carefully broken down Sanders's entire argument, showing that it was based on assumptions, not facts, on talking points, not real policy knowledge. The tide had turned completely even. Cooper seemed surprised by how much the momentum had shifted. What started as Sanders's attempt to show her strength had turned into a complete takedown of her credibility on education policy. And yet, Crockett had saved her strongest blow for the very end. And what followed would be shared again and again on TV and social media. "Governor Sanders, I want to finish by speaking to something you said when we first started talking," Crockett said, her voice firm and final. "You questioned what I've done and said I'm just another leader who only talks but never acts. I believe that shows something important about how you lead and why Arkansas is still facing problems in education." Crockett paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "Real leadership isn't about tearing people down to make yourself look strong. True leadership means taking the time to understand difficult problems, working together with others to solve them, and owning the outcome. You didn't come here tonight ready to discuss education policies seriously. You came ready to throw political punches based on your guesses about me and what I stand for." Her criticism hit hard, going right to the heart of how Sanders had handled the debate. "But leading a state isn't about guesses, Governor Sanders. It's about truth and facts. And the facts say this: while you've been focused on culture, war topics, I've been writing laws that solve real problems. While you've been signing bills that create confusion and legal messes, I've been teaming up with both Republicans and Democrats to pass laws that actually help kids learn." Sanders tried to strike back one last time, her voice growing louder with frustration. "Congresswoman Crockett, you can read out all the laws you want, but your party still wants to change the American school system in ways most parents don't support." But her answer sounded empty and weak, nothing like the strong start she had made. Crockett's final words were calm and sharp. "Governor Sanders, the only thing I want to change is the results for kids who aren't getting the education they deserve. And if your idea of American values includes keeping kids stuck in poverty, blocking teachers from doing their jobs well, and blaming others instead of fixing issues, then yes, I absolutely want to change that." The silence that followed was heavy. Sanders sat back in her seat, clearly defeated. Her entire debate plan had fallen apart. Meanwhile, Crockett looked calm and steady, as if she had carefully taken apart each one of Sanders's points. Cooper, seeing the debate had naturally come to an end, moved on to his final statements. But by then, the damage to Sanders's image was already done. Right after the debate ended, clips of Crockett's best moments started spreading quickly online. The hashtag Crockett Schools Sanders started trending on Twitter, with users sharing the videos where she exposed Sanders's contradictions. Commentators from both sides admitted they had seen something surprising, a total role reversal. The newcomer completely outshone the experienced governor. The clip that hurt Sanders the most showed Crockett holding the Arkansas grant paperwork and asking her to explain how she could ask for federal money to fix historical problems, while also banning talks about history. Sanders's shocked face when she realized she had been cornered, became a meme, shared thousands of times with captions mocking politicians who show up unprepared for real policy talks. Right-wing media tried to say Sanders had won by pointing to her early attacks and ignoring what happened after. But even Fox News had to admit that Sanders had been caught off guard by how prepared Crockett was. The next morning, a political panel showed Republican experts warning others, "Don't make the mistake of judging opponents based on weak assumptions, and always be ready with real facts, not just talking points." On the other hand, liberal voices called the debate proof that facts and deep knowledge beat empty speeches. MSNBC spent a lot of time showing Crockett's performance and praised how well she had prepared and delivered. Progressive leaders used the moment to show that young Democratic lawmakers were ready to take on senior Republicans and win, not just with votes, but with strong facts and smart debate skills. The impact didn't stop at TV shows. Within 2 days, 3 Republican governors who were set to debate Democrats asked to change their debate plans. They were clearly shaken by what had just happened to Sanders. In the House, Democratic leaders started showing clips of Crockett's debate as an example of how to stand up strong, use facts, and go on the offense when needed. For Sanders, this debate badly hurt her national political future. Experts said it raised real doubts about whether she was ready for bigger office or able to handle hard policy topics under pressure. The difference between her confident start and her nervous end became a warning example about being ready and not underestimating your opponent. Local newspapers in Arkansas gave the debate big attention. Several editorials questioned if Sanders really understood her own education plans. One major issue was that Arkansas had asked for federal money through a law Crockett wrote, while at the same time passing state laws that totally went against that funding's goals. That created a serious political mess for Sanders back home. On the other hand, Crockett's national name grew fast. Democratic fundraising emails included her debate clips, and supporters responded with energy and money. She got speaking requests from across the country. State and local Democratic groups all wanted to invite the Congresswoman, who had stood up to one of the GOP's biggest stars. The debate also led to bigger talks about how important preparation and real content are in politics. Media coaches started using the Sanders-Crockett exchange to show how careful planning can beat even more experienced opponents. University professors began adding the debate into political science lessons on communication and strategy. The effects of the debate didn't fade quickly. They kept growing in the weeks that followed. Republican political teams across the country began emergency training programs for their candidates. They treated the debate as a warning, showing what happens when you underestimate your rival. The Republican Governors Association quietly sent out a memo titled Lessons from Arkansas. It gave rules for being fully ready in future public events. The note said politicians must understand policy in detail and stop relying only on scripted points. It also listed key mistakes Sanders had made. First, her team didn't properly study Crockett's legislative history and missed the fact that Arkansas was getting help from a bill Crockett had written. Second, Sanders hadn't looked over her own state's federal grant forms carefully, and that left her wide open to the trap Crockett revealed. Thirdly, her rehearsal for the debate had centered more on general political criticisms instead of defending individual policies, which made her ineffective when asked about specific parts of her legislation. On the other side, Democratic strategists began closely examining Crockett's debate style and started creating learning tools inspired by her tactics. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee put together a detailed handbook named the Crockett Method, which broke her debate approach into lessons. The guide highlighted how crucial deep opponent research is, how using official documents as props can be strategic, and how letting rivals overreach can create perfect moments to strike back. These training tools outlined major aspects of what made Crockett successful. One key move was how she let Sanders complete her opening remarks before jumping in, allowing the Arkansas governor to fully commit to positions Crockett later broke down piece by piece. Crockett's use of precise legal language and proof-based contradictions turned what might have been a noisy political argument into a meaningful policy exchange, where her solid preparation clearly gave her the upper hand. Scholars took strong interest in the debate as a real-life example of today's political communication. Harvard's Kennedy School of Government invited both figures for a follow-up discussion session, but Sanders declined, while Crockett eagerly agreed in her visit. Crockett explained to students how she had planned ahead for Sanders' likely attacks and made tailored answers supported by official documents. Georgetown University's Public Policy Institute even made the debate part of a semester-long class about political messaging. Professor Maria Rodriguez, who ran the course, said the Sanders-Crockett showdown marked a major change in how debates are expected to be handled. Students these days, Rodriguez told her class, are sharper and more aware of when leaders are repeating empty lines versus when they truly understand policy. Crockett recognized this shift, while Sanders seemed to stick to outdated beliefs about debates. Internationally, the political science world paid attention to. The London School of Economics organized a conference on U.S. political speech in the digital era, where the Crockett-Sanders clash was studied in depth. European researchers were especially curious about how the event showed a change in how power works in democracies where clear skill and preparation now often matter more than just having experience or title. In the U.S., the debate also quickly impacted political fundraising. Donations to Sanders' PAC fell almost 40% in the month after the debate. Behind closed doors, many top Arkansas contributors began doubting her readiness for national politics, causing her planned fundraising trip to other states to be scaled down as GOP donors started to reconsider backing her presidential dreams. What stood out the most was the loss of small-dollar donors, once passionate fans of her tough-talking style. After the debate, new polls revealed that although Sanders still had her base in Arkansas, her image across the country had taken a real hit. GOP poll analyst Frank Luntz noted that she had lost trust among educated suburban voters, the exact group the party needed to win tight races. In contrast, Crockett's campaign got a record-breaking wave of donations. Her quarterly fundraising broke all past numbers, with money pouring in from every part of the country. The debate elevated her from a mostly unknown first-term representative to a rising Democratic star. Her team reported receiving contributions from all 50 states in just 1 week post-debate. Many donors specifically mentioned how she dismantled Sanders' arguments as the reason for giving. Political experts were especially interested in how her donor map wasn't just strong in deep blue areas, but also got solid support from swing states and even from some Republican-leaning regions where voters were moved by her performance. This broad support hinted that her success in the debate crossed political boundaries and attracted people who cared more about skill and facts than party loyalty. The debate also reshaped how laws were written. Republican governors started being more careful with proposing education bills that had unclear or contradictory language, worried that Democrats might call out those flaws in public debates. In fact, some Republican-controlled legislatures quietly edited or pulled back bills after legal reviews flagged issues like those that had hurt Sanders. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis told his staff to go through all state education laws and check for possible mismatches with federal funding requirements. Similar actions happened in Texas, Georgia, and other red states as their leaders tried to avoid a repeat of Sanders' mistake. It struck many that a state-level debate on Arkansas education could ripple across the entire country's lawmaking. Democrats, meanwhile, began copying Crockett's research style for their own political fights. House Democratic leaders even formed a new team focused only on catching contradictions between Republican speeches and real-world policy. That team's first big win came when they uncovered a similar problem in Tennessee's education laws, which led to a major hearing that embarrassed GOP lawmakers there. Sanders, on a personal level, showed signs of strain in her next public appearances. Experts noticed her usual boldness had faded, and she started turning down live TV interviews, especially those that might lead to face-offs with Democrats. Her team introduced strict rules that she had to get full prep documents even for basic public events, which was a major change from her past habit of using broad talking points and relying on instincts. In contrast, Crockett's confidence clearly grew. She began seeking interviews on right-leaning media, joining debate panels where she knew questions would be tough. Her debate prep had become a repeatable formula for turning tough challenges into chances to highlight flaws and conservative arguments. This strategic boldness boosted her political standing. House Democratic leaders brought her into big policy talks and media planning sessions, recognizing how her mix of legal knowledge, political sense, and messaging made her a strong voice in battles with Republicans. Speaker Nancy Pelosi openly applauded her debate performance, calling it a textbook example of how Democrats should counter GOP talking points with facts, planning, and sharp thinking. The debate also changed how political media worked. Reporters began focusing more on the facts in political arguments instead of just the drama. Many media outlets hired real-time fact-checkers to review claims during televised debates. This change came in part from what viewers now wanted: detailed policy content over flashy but shallow exchanges. Cable news programs adjusted how they booked guests, making sure participants could actually discuss policy, not just repeat lines. Show producers even started requiring politicians to prove they understood specific laws before inviting them to serious interviews. The Crockett-Sanders debate became a model for political readiness. Across party lines, political consultants started warning clients that charm and general knowledge were no longer enough to survive in today's media climate, especially during high-stakes debates. They would need deep policy understanding and careful strategy.